I never thought I'd find the letter that would destroy my marriage while organizing old tax documents. But there it was, tucked between faded receipts and dusty manila folders. My grandfather's familiar handwriting jumping off the page like a shock of cold water. My name is Eliza, and until that moment, I was living what I thought was a perfectly normal life with my husband Wyatt. We had our routines, morning coffee together, quick kisses goodbye, evening walks around the neighborhood when the weather was nice. The kind of life that looks good in Instagram posts but feels a little hollow when you're actually living it. The letter was dated 3 months before my grandfather passed away. I remembered that time well. Wyatt had been unusually interested in visiting him, always volunteering to help with errands or yard work. I'd found it sweet then. Funny how differently things look in hindsight. My dearest Eliza, the letter began. If you're reading this, I need you to know something important about the trust fund I've set up for you. Your husband Wyatt came to see me last week, asking questions about the inheritance. The way he spoke about it, well, let's just say it reminded me of vultures circling. My hands started shaking. I had to set the letter down for a moment, remembering how Wyatt had been pushing lately for us to combine our finances, to put everything in joint accounts for simplicity's sake. The doorbell rang, making me jump. I quickly folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket as Wyatt's voice called out from the front door. Honey, can you help me with these groceries? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Coming, I called back, my voice surprisingly normal considering how my heart was racing. Walking to the door, I watched my husband struggling with paper bags, his charming smile flashing as he saw me. The same smile that had won me over 5 years ago now felt like a mask I was seeing through for the first time. You wouldn't believe the deal I got on steaks, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I thought we could have your parents over this weekend? Maybe discuss that investment opportunity one mentioned. I helped him with the groceries, nodding and smiling, playing my part while the letter burned in my pocket like a lit match. What else had my grandfather written? What else had Wyatt been planning behind my back? One thing was certain, I couldn't let him know I'd found the letter. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what kind of game my husband was playing. I spent the next week watching Wyatt like a detective observing a suspect, and everything that once seemed normal now felt calculated. The way he'd casually mention investment opportunities over dinner, how he'd leave the room for phone calls, even his sudden interest in my family's history, it all had a different weight now. You seem distracted lately, Wyatt said one evening, massaging my shoulders as I sat at my desk. His touch, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. Maybe we should take that vacation we've been talking about. Just us, away from everything. I forced a smile. Maybe. Work's just been crazy. The lie came easier than I expected. Actually, I'm meeting Tessa for coffee tomorrow. Girl time, you know? His hands paused for a fraction of a second. Tessa? Didn't you just see her last week? Did I? I kept my voice light, but my heart was racing. I guess I need extra friend time lately. The next morning, I sat across from Tessa in our favorite coffee shop, the letter spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. Her face grew darker with each paragraph she read. That sneaky bastard, she muttered, looking up at me. Have you checked your accounts? Made sure everything's still where it should be. Everything looks normal, but I stopped as my phone buzzed. A text from Marjorie, my mother-in-law. Dropping by for lunch tomorrow. Need to discuss something important. Tessa saw my expression change. What is it? Marjorie's coming over tomorrow. She never just drops by without an agenda. Want me to come over? I could work remotely from your place, be there for backup. Before I could answer, I spotted a familiar face through the coffee shop window, Wyatt, walking past with his phone pressed to his ear. He'd told me he had meetings all morning at his office across town. Get down, I hissed, pulling Tessa lower in her seat. We watched as he stopped outside, arguing with someone on the phone. I told you it's handled, he was saying, his voice faint through the glass. She doesn't suspect anything. No, mother, just stick to the plan. Tessa squeezed my hand under the table. You need to make copies of that letter. Keep one somewhere safe, away from your house. I nodded, still watching Wyatt through the window. The man I'd married, The one I thought I knew better than anyone, suddenly felt like a stranger. And tomorrow, his mother was coming to my house with some kind of agenda. I think, I said slowly, I need to be ready for whatever Marjorie's bringing to lunch tomorrow. Because something tells me it's not going to be her famous potato salad. Marjorie arrived exactly at noon, carrying a leather portfolio instead of her usual casserole dish. I'd positioned myself in the kitchen where I could hear everything happening in the living room, pretending to prepare lunch while Wyatt greeted his mother. Their whispered conversation drifted through the doorway. "Did you bring the papers?" Wyatt asked. "Of course I did. But are you sure about this? Once we start." "Mother, please. Just stick to what we discussed." I busied myself with the salad when they entered the kitchen, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bowl. Marjorie's perfectly coiffed appearance and practiced smile couldn't hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. "Eliza, dear," she said, placing her portfolio on the counter. "We need to discuss something important about the family business." I set down the salad bowl. "What family business?" "Well, your grandfather's estate, of course." She pulled out a stack of documents. "We've found some irregularities in how the trust was set up. Wyatt's been concerned about protecting your interests." My throat went dry. "My interests?" "Sweetheart." Wyatt stepped closer, placing his hand on my lower back. "We think someone might be trying to take advantage of your inheritance. We need to make some changes to protect it." The touch that once brought comfort now felt like a brand. I stepped away, pretending to check the oven. "What kind of changes?" "Just some simple adjustments," Marjorie said, sliding a document toward me. "Transferring the trust into a joint family account. For security." I glanced at the paper, my accountant's training catching the careful wording. They weren't just trying to transfer the trust, they were trying to dissolve it entirely. "I need to use the bathroom," I said suddenly, backing away. "Excuse me." I locked the bathroom door and pulled out my phone, hands trembling as I texted Tessa. "They're here with papers. Trying to take everything." Her response was immediate. "Don't sign anything. I'm calling your lawyer right now." Through the door, I heard Wyatt and Marjorie arguing in harsh whispers. "She's suspicious," Marjorie hissed. "This isn't going to work." "It has to work," Wyatt snapped. "The deadline's in 3 days, and if we don't get that money, then you shouldn't have made those promises to the investors, should you?" I pressed my ear against the door, my heart pounding. Investors? What had Wyatt done? My phone buzzed again. "Tessa. Lawyer says don't sign. Getting emergency court order. Get out of there if you can." I looked at my reflection in the mirror, seeing the truth I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage, my home, my life, it had all been built on lies. And now I had to decide, walk back out there and play along, or make a run for it with whatever dignity I had left. I chose option 3, neither running nor playing along. Instead, I walked back into the kitchen, grabbed my grandfather's letter from its hiding place in the cookbook shelf, and slapped it on the counter between Wyatt and Marjorie. "Before we discuss any transfers," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "maybe we should talk about this." The color drained from Wyatt's face as he recognized the letter. Marjorie's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the counter once, twice, before going still. "Where did you find that?" Wyatt asked, reaching for the letter. I snatched it back before he could touch it. "Does it matter? What matters is that grandfather knew. He knew you were after the money even back then." I turned to Marjorie. "And I'm guessing you helped him plan it." "Eliza, darling." Marjorie's voice took on that sickly sweet tone she used at charity functions. "You're obviously upset, but don't." I held up my hand. "Just don't. I heard you both earlier. Something about investors and a deadline." I watched Wyatt flinch. "What did you do, Wyatt? What did you promise people?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. Now it just looked desperate. "It's not what you think. I was trying to build something for us. A future." "By stealing my inheritance?" "By investing it." He slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. "Your grandfather's money is just sitting there, doing nothing. I could triple it in 3 months with the right investments." The same way you tripled your client's money? Marjorie's sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit something. That's it, isn't it? You lost their money, and now you need mine to cover it. Wyatt's silence was all the confirmation I needed. My phone buzzed again, probably Tessa with news from the lawyer, but I kept my eyes on my husband. How much? I asked. Eliza.
How?
Much. He slumped against the counter. 2.3 million. The room spun slightly. That was almost exactly the amount in my trust fund. The fund my grandfather had set up to protect me, to ensure I'd always be independent. Get out, I whispered. When neither of them moved, I said it louder. Get out. Both of you. You can't just throw us out. Marjorie started, but I cut her off. Actually, I can. This house? It's in my name. Another thing grandfather arranged. I pulled out my phone, finally looking at Tessa's message. And according to my lawyer, if either of you comes near me or my assets again, you'll both be facing fraud charges. After kicking them out, I spent hours digging through Wyatt's home office. What I found made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing massive transfers, desperate emails from angry investors, and a half-written confession letter that Wyatt had never sent.
My phone rang.
Harold, my father-in-law's name flashed on the screen. I almost declined, but something made me answer. Eliza. His voice was quiet, different from his usual passive tone. I need to tell you something. Can you meet me at the diner on 5th? 20 minutes later, I slid into a booth across from Harold. He looked older somehow, defeated. I should have warned you, he said, pushing a manila folder across the table. But I was too much of a coward to stand up to them. Inside were documents showing that Wyatt had been embezzling from his company for years. Harold, as CFO, had been covering it up. Why are you showing me this now? Because he wouldn't meet my eyes. Marjorie convinced the board to pin everything on me. They're announcing it tomorrow, claiming I acted alone. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup. Your husband, my son, he's going to let them do it. My phone buzzed with a text from Wyatt. Coming home. We need to talk. I can explain everything. Does Wyatt know you're here? I asked Harold. He shook his head. Marjorie's planning to use your inheritance to cover the losses. Once that's done, they'll have me take the fall. I'll lose everything, my reputation, my pension, possibly my freedom. Another text from Wyatt. I love you. Remember that. Whatever you've heard, remember I did it all for us. I looked at Harold's broken expression, thought of my grandfather's warning, remembered all the lies. What if, I said slowly, we could prove where the money really went? Harold's eyes widened. The records are all at the house, in Marjorie's personal safe. I stood up, my mind racing. Give me your key. Tonight's their charity gala, right? The house will be empty. Eliza, if they catch you, they won't. I grabbed my purse. But I need you to do something for me.
Keep them at the gala.
All of them.
Can you do that?
He nodded, handing over his house key. As I turned to leave, he caught my arm. Why would you help me? After everything our family has done to you. I thought about my grandfather's letter, about justice versus revenge, about the difference between punishment and accountability. Because, I said, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's making them face the truth. Breaking into my in-laws' house was easier than I expected. The real challenge came when I heard footsteps upstairs. Someone was home. I froze behind Marjorie's desk, clutching the documents I'd just pulled from her safe, my heart threatening to burst through my chest. I know you're down here, Eliza. Wyatt's voice carried down the stairs. Mother's security system sent an alert to my phone. Of course it did. I should have known they'd have backup measures. The sound of his footsteps grew closer as he descended the stairs. You know what's funny? His voice was eerily calm. I actually thought you'd understand. That you want to help save the family business. Instead, you're stealing from us? Stealing. I stood up, facing him across the darkened study. That's rich, coming from you. He moved closer, and I noticed something different in his expression, something dangerous I'd never seen before. Where are the documents? Safe. Like the money you stole from your investors? I backed toward the door. Or the evidence you're using to frame your own father? Give me the papers, Eliza. Another step closer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My phone buzzed, probably Tessa wondering why I'd missed our check-in call. The momentary distraction was all Wyatt needed. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm with enough force to make me gasp. You really think you can win this? He yanked me closer. Against my mother? Against me? We built this family's legacy while you were still playing accountant in your tiny cubicle. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You're hurting me. Then give me the documents. I can't. My voice shook. Because I already sent copies to the SEC. His face went blank. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features. Not the charming one I'd fallen for years ago, but something cold and unfamiliar. You're bluffing. He reached for my phone. Let's see those sent messages, shall we? I jerked away, but he was stronger. My phone clattered to the floor as we struggled. In the dim light, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, disheveled, scared, trapped in a house with a man I no longer recognized. Wyatt, please. The papers.
Now.
His grip tightened further. Or you'll what? A new voice cut through the darkness. We both turned to see Marjorie in the doorway, still in her gala dress. Go ahead, son. Show her exactly who you've become. The look that passed between mother and son told me everything I needed to know. I'd walked right into their trap, and now they had me exactly where they wanted me. Marjorie stepped into the study, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Let her go, Wyatt. That's not how we handle things. His grip loosened, but he didn't release me completely. She sent evidence to the SEC. No, Marjorie smiled, she didn't. Because the real evidence is still in that safe, isn't it, Eliza? I glanced at the open safe behind the desk, then at the documents I'd grabbed. Even in the dim light, I could see they were just old tax returns. A decoy. Looking for these? Marjorie pulled a USB drive from her clutch. Harold told me about your little meeting. Did you really think he'd choose you over his own family? My stomach dropped. Harold had warned them. The whole thing had been a setup. You know what amazes me? Marjorie continued, perching on the edge of her desk. How willing you were to believe the worst about us. About your husband. I saw the evidence. You saw what we wanted you to see. She twirled the drive between her fingers. Those angry investors? All actors. The embezzlement documents? Fabricated. We needed to know if you could be trusted with the real family business. What are you talking about? Your grandfather's money isn't just sitting in a trust fund, dear. It's keeping certain operations running smoothly. Operations that require absolute loyalty. Wyatt's hand moved from my arm to my shoulder. Almost gentle now. I wanted to tell you, but Mother insisted we test you first. Test me? I laughed, the sound bordering on hysteric. By gaslighting me? Manipulating me? By seeing if you'd choose loyalty or justice, Marjorie stood. And you failed spectacularly. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw Tessa getting out of her car, phone in hand. My missed check-in must have worried her. Marjorie sighed. Your faithful friend. Wyatt, deal with her, please. As Wyatt moved toward the door, something in me snapped. I lunged for my phone on the floor, simultaneously shoving Marjorie aside. She stumbled, the USB drive flying from her hand. Tessa, call the police. I screamed, knowing my voice would carry through the open window. There. Marjorie's hand clamped over my mouth, surprisingly strong for her age. But she'd forgotten about the drive. I had it in my hand now, and as Wyatt turned back, I met his eyes. Choose, Wyatt, I said, pulling free from Marjorie. Help them frame your father, or help me expose the truth. Right now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Wyatt did something none of us expected, he laughed. Oh, Eliza, he said, pulling out his phone. Who do you think came up with this plan in the first place? 6 months later, I sat across from the district attorney, watching her review the final pieces of evidence against the Harringtons. The USB drive had been a gold mine, not of the evidence I'd been looking for, but something far more damaging. Years of money laundering, blackmail, and fraud, all meticulously documented by Wyatt himself. Your grandfather would be proud, the DA said, closing the file. He spent years trying to gather enough evidence to bring them down. I touched the worn envelope in my pocket, my grandfather's real letter, found hidden in a false bottom of his old desk after everything fell apart. He'd known about the Harringtons' operations all along, had been working with the FBI to expose them. My inheritance had been bait, and I'd unknowingly finished what he'd started. Outside the courthouse, Tessa waited with coffee and a newspaper. The headline read, Harrington Family Empire Crumbles, CEO and son face federal charges. Have you heard from Harold? She asked. I shook my head. After turning state's evidence against his wife and son, he'd disappeared into witness protection. Sometimes I wondered if he'd planned it all, setting me up that night, knowing I'd find the real evidence instead of the decoys. Look who's here. Tessa nodded toward the street. Marjorie stood by her car, watching me. She'd aged decades in 6 months, her perfect facade cracked beyond repair. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw something unexpected. Respect. She raised her hand in a small wave, then drove away. It would be the last time I ever saw her. That evening, I returned to my grandfather's house, my house now, and found an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a key and an offshore account number, along with a note in Harold's handwriting. For your next chapter. Some fortunes are better earned than inherited. I smiled, thinking of the small accounting firm I'd started, helping other families protect themselves from predators like the Harringtons. Revenge hadn't brought my grandfather back or healed my broken marriage, but it had given me something else, the truth about who I was and what I was capable of. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You were right about choices. I deleted it without responding. Some choices, once made, don't need revisiting. Looking out at the garden my grandfather had loved, I thought about legacy, not the kind built on money and manipulation, but the kind built on courage and conviction. He trusted me to make the right choice when the time came, even if he couldn't tell me what that choice would be. I pulled out his letter one last time, running my fingers over the final lines. Remember, dear heart, the greatest revenge isn't in destroying what others have built, but in building something better of your own.